if the game's getting faster and players are breaking, at what point do we have to look at the players getting to a point where they just are not going to be able to cope with how the game has changed?
Like you said, players are not robots. Players can't just keep playing for longer, more games, less recovery. Science is going to have to evolve so much to allow people to do that. And of course it has, but it's going to be so tough. You kind of know because you're all sat there, all enthusiastic, all ready for the day, and the physio or the club doctor walks in with his head down a little bit, and you're thinking, "Oh no!" And he goes, "Do you want it?" If he's really if he's really comedic, he'll go, "Do you want the good news or the bad news?"
Yeah.
Those departments, I would say, on the whole, work harder than anywhere in the club.
Yeah.
They're there till, I won't say what time because people will be sat there and what?
Nearly 1 o'clock.
Welcome, football fans, to Breaking Lines, the podcast that takes you behind the scenes of the beautiful game like never before. I'm Gary Rowett, former player and manager, joined by the insightful Dave Carolan, a man with his finger on the pulse of football's beating heart. Together, Dave and I bring you unrivaled insight, context, and a few stories from the trenches. Join us as we dissect the game, break down the plays, and explore the intricate dance between managers, players, fans, and the beautiful game itself. This is Breaking Lines, where the game is more than just a match.
Injury crisis. Every club has one. It should be its own banner at every club. From time to time through the seasons, you're just going to run into one. It's got to be one of the most frustrating, challenging aspects of being a manager, a head coach, having to deal with the fact that you have lots of players missing.
It's a real injury crisis, or the excuse the manager gives when you can't win many games. It's like, I've got so many injuries.
You choose. I'm
tying up. We'll do both.
Yeah.
It's a difficult one, isn't it? Because it's funny how, a crisis, obviously the fact it's called a crisis is, there's a number of players injured, a number of key players injured all at once. And it's strange, isn't it? Because it never seems to dissipate over a season where maybe you get one injured every couple of weeks and, the other one comes back. It's always everyone at the same time. And you end up having 5, 6, 7. You see it, it's ridiculous, isn't it? And I think the first thing like we would do in that scenario is go, okay, what are we doing wrong? Or are we doing something wrong? But sometimes you can have those freak moments, but opportunity for a centre-back to go and play up front. What's the problem?
Who knew? That we were going back to the days of a giant striker playing up front.
How many players would have been on? Well, here's one for you. How many players would have been unearthed in an injury crisis? So, one man's crisis is a young player's opportunity. So, there'd have been many a young player, wouldn't there, been forced into early action maybe before they're ready to get that chance. But what I would say is, it's such a challenging time, isn't it? Because as a manager, like, winning games is hard enough as it is without anything additional to add the pressure on top of it. And sometimes, that feeling when the physio walks into your room and says he's going to be out for 4 weeks, and he's going to be out for 4 weeks. And you just sat there with your head in your hands thinking, oh my God, could this get any worse?
Do you ever notice that physios always speak in even numbers? It's always 2, 4, 6, or 8 weeks. It's never 3. He's never going to be back in 15 days. It's always multiples of 2.
Giving themselves time to look good. Yeah, that's how it works, Dave.
You sneaky physios, we see you.
You should know that by now. Yeah, set the time longer. Yeah. So when you bring them back earlier, great. Looks like we've done a brilliant job. Yeah. So it is a challenge, isn't it? It's a challenge because, we've been at places where, the medical team, of course, then are under extreme pressure because, they've got 5, 6 bodies every day, so that's a real challenge in terms of the amount of staff available and the amount of work needed.
Yeah, absolutely.
You can feel externally the pressure from the outside. As soon as you say injury crisis, it feels like the medical team are getting the brunt of that. And again, that's that moment where they've got to sort of accept that that's just part and parcel of the game.
And for the medical team, it's generally not their fault the players are injured. Like they just got to have to pick up the pieces, but certainly lots of fingers get blamed.
Yeah, and they've got to get performance. They blame the performance team.
The coaches.
No, the medical team blame the performance team. The performance team blame the coaches. The coaches blame the manager. The manager blames everyone back again. So, yeah, I think that's a challenge, isn't it? Sometimes, we've seen it before where, okay, you see a new manager goes into a club and he wants to train a certain way because he wants to put his stamp on the team. So maybe they train harder than they normally would. Suddenly, 4 weeks in, you get 7 hamstring injuries or something. You can't blame the medical or the physical performance team for any of it.
Should have been more robust.
There you go.
There
you go. So
yeah,
but so that's just the situation that everyone's got to deal with. I think it's easier to understand it sometimes if there's lots of different injuries that you sort of go, well, there's no real correlation,
no pattern.
When you see the patterns, that's when you start to go, okay, have we trained too hard, or have we trained, on the match day pick? Because again, you think about some of those scenarios. What's the reason for it? Sometimes there's a reason for an injury crisis, isn't there? Sometimes it's because your training pitches are frozen. You've trained on your match pitch. Your match pitch is miles harder, and all of a sudden you've got like 5 calf injuries all at once, or you've sprinted too much in training and suddenly you've got hamstring injuries, or they're not robust enough. And, we haven't done that work, and therefore, so there's so many reasons, but I think it's, I think a good club and a good culture, nobody gets to blame. It's just everybody's trying to work out the best way of getting through the issue. But they are challenging times. I've been there as a player before where we've had no striker for 5 or 6 games. And if you're a defender, you're sat there going, well, actually, usually at that point, you go and play me up front because it's bloody hard. It's a lot easier than playing at the back, because that you've got to go and keep clean sheets. You're not going to score as many goals. You're going to struggle for maybe a period. It can have a really debilitating side to your season. Those little periods we spoke about before, you could have 7 or 8 games in a 5-6 week period. So, the real challenges, and they always seem to come once or twice a season, or one club seems to get worse than others, and it's difficult to understand why at times.
Yeah, I think you make a great point there about the environment. And we've certainly seen it at different clubs where, yes, maybe the facilities aren't as, developed or maybe as advanced as the big clubs would have, where they'd have very, very consistent surfaces, say, between training ground and match pitch. You've got something that's really, really soft that you train on for 5 days a week. And then you go to your match pitch, which looks beautiful, but it's rock hard. And we see the soft tissue injuries just because they change the surface. And that's not something that we're going to be able to do anything about, is it? That's just a statement of fact. Like, soft training pitches, hard match pitches, you got to pick up injury.
And that's a challenge, isn't it? I suppose from a managerial perspective, from a coaching perspective, from a performance element, it's really trying to make sure some of those issues don't happen. And that's why we spoke about before, like good metrics, good sort of experience of what those metrics look like in terms of, the training, the distances ran, the distances sprinted, the sort of all of those parameters that go around what a good training session look like. Because of course, it's not just the technical and tactical side, it's the physical side as well. And some of that you can control, can't you? Like you get really bad, I remember periods in League Two where I think at one stage we had 9 games in hand on one team, because our games were just getting called off left, right and centre for frozen pitches. We had no undersoil heating. We had no ability to put the frost sheets down, or so suddenly you're training, and that could be your training pitches, your match pitches, whatever that is. You suddenly can have a massive volume of games, small squad, and all of a sudden that's now a completely different challenge to one you've prepared for. Absolutely. And that could create a barrage of injuries. So I think there's so many ways of going around it, but it's a horrible position to be in, and it's that it's not going to get better. It's going to get worse before it gets better. It's a real pressure and a challenge on the medical team. and sometimes those moments are kind of like, what have we done to deserve this? Because, there isn't always rhyme and reason, is there? So, but if you go back to that first point we made, like sometimes, again, I've seen so many young players where you go, you know what, a young player's career has springboarded from getting into a team early because of that injury crisis, because of those injuries. I think I'm sure we had a moment where last year at Millwall or a few years ago at Millwall, remember we put Zach Lovelace in the squad. I think he was 15 at the time. 15 years old, and he was in the squad because we had loads of injuries and loads of illnesses.
I can't remember that.
I think so. Not sure why.
It's purely selection.
It's called COVID, I think. But so there was an opportunity for a young player like that.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, that player then gets his chance. And I can sort of think of multiple ways that's happened for a young player.
Opportunity knocks in those situations, and then you hope that the under 21 manager or the under 18 manager who's been pushing players and saying, like, give them an opportunity. Well, now's your opportunity. Are they ready? And can they go and perform? Because where there's somebody else's fallback, here's the opportunity for that young player or a squad member who hadn't been considered for a while, and off you go. And they either sink or swim, don't they? They take the opportunity or they don't. Yeah,
and again, a young player doesn't care how he gets his opportunity, does he? He just wants a chance to go out there and show. And you've often seen young players that perhaps you felt are not ready, but by necessity you've had to play. And that young player's really surprised everyone how he's took to the game and how he's actually, he's almost handled the pressure and handled the moment. And I think there's been some really good examples of that over the years. There's been some really good examples of how some of those players have stepped up and actually, their careers have started on the basis of that, So I think that's really important. It doesn't matter how you get that chance. What matters is you get that chance. And sometimes that young player has a moment to take it. And we've seen, like I said, some really good examples of that. I've had some terrible times for an injury crisis. I'm going to go back to. We're going to cover similar stories in this podcast, aren't we? Because
of course,
because those stories are suddenly going to have multiple reasons and opportunities and different sort of parameters around this. So I go back to the player final for Burton. I remember that week before that final. Honestly, I've never seen anything like it. It was the most comical week I have ever seen, and that's not the training.
Right. Okay.
That
save this one for the book. No,
that could have been labelled at us, but yeah, I remember I had one player that played, and I knew he was injured. I knew he was injured, but I knew he desperately wanted to play. And after that game, he was out for 3 months because he just wasn't right.
Right.
And I had another player that was injured and did virtually the same thing. I had so many moments in that final where I had to almost just patch a team up, put it out there. And, because it's such a big game, it's almost the opposite.
Yeah.
Where you've got an injury crisis, but everyone's declaring themselves fit because they're probably selfishly thinking about, I want to play in the final.
Of course they do.
And
that's natural, isn't it?
Great mentality. And as a player, you're sort of thinking, well, even if I only last 10, I've played in that final. But as a manager, you're looking at it, you're going, well, come on, guys, we actually want to win the final, not just appear.
Yeah.
So that's some really, really tough moments where those injury crises have actually had a monumental effect on, a big game.
So let's throw this back to Tales of Yore. Aston Villa won, I think, the title in the early 80s. They used 14 players across a whole league season. Now, we get through more than 14 players every game now, and certainly we're not seeing players who are playing 46 game seasons, 50 game seasons particularly anymore, where they're starting and finishing every game like we would have done in the past. Is that because the game's changed, or is it because the squads are bigger, or because you got more subs, you can just sub everybody?
No, do you know what I think that is genuinely? Sports science.
Okay. Right.
Sports science has ruined the game, Dave, clearly, hasn't it?
Well, it's got faster, hasn't it? It's got more physical, athletic. You know,
desperate attempt.
some players in the past would not survive nowadays. No, not looking at anybody in particular.
No, but you're right. It's an interesting. Oh, Christ, this could be a whole new debate, couldn't it? It's an interesting debate of when you look at that as a, the players would have trained on poorer pitches. Okay, the game I'd hate to say the game was far slower for fear of multiple top older players
We have the
commenting
research
on
to
our
prove it.
podcast
Yeah.
saying that's disgusting from you.
We have the research to prove it. And if
Yeah.
any of them want their video analysis done, just be prepared for the results.
But I do think, how is that like? Players, like you say, was it just players back then were conditioned just to go out there with injury after injury and just get on with it? Was that just the mentality? That's not right or that's wrong, but players would just do that. They would just grind out games and performances. Was the fact that was it not the players, but was it the pitches that actually slowed the game down a little bit more?
Yeah.
So not the players. So the players perhaps didn't quite have to, or was it actually harder because the pitches were heavier? You think back then,
Pitch was heavy, ball was heavy.
pitch was heavy, ball was heavy.
Yeah.
You'd have to keep churning game after game, so the pressure on each player would have been bigger. But yet, like you said, how on earth remember when there's only one sub?
Yeah.
Yeah, the players would get through the whole season with, like you say, a very, very small squad. So I don't know the answer to that. And of course, you could speculate, forever on speed of the game. Are players fitter? Were players more resilient back then? Were players actually fitter back then? Because actually, they got through the games, and players now don't get. Or are players more conditioned now to thinking about if I'm not really? I've played with players. I remember playing with Paolo Di Canio at Charlton for a spell, and like you'd look and I remember that season I almost had felt like I had like a double hernia, and I'm playing on, churning game after game out, and if he felt something that wasn't right with him, and he was an incredible player, incredible physical parameters as well as technical or abilities, and if he felt something was not quite right, I remember he'd go back to Italy for a week or two with his physicians, and he would come back $1 million, and feel great for the next game. Whereas some of the rest of us were just churning maybe 80% of, us hod carriers. We're playing to 80%. But then you looked at him and thought, wow, he looks immaculate, and he's like 38. I'm 28 and I look like I'm older than him already. So
I think that's just the Italian climate. It's nothing to do with Donis.
But, there was a player that, that maybe had to feel 100% each time. Look, top player, and I'm not, that was just my understanding of the situation. Whereas a lot of the players, maybe the British, this is not about cultures and nationalities, but a lot of the British players at the time would play through, the culture was almost just to play through everything. Don't be soft, just play through everything you can and just carry on and play games. And, certainly I think there's a lot more awareness from players now. There's a lot more, there's a lot more support services to allow the players to make some of those decisions a little bit better. But it's definitely an interesting debate, isn't it?
I think you're certainly seeing that now, even in the academies. So, we're around clubs where we know that the academy structures are really good. They've got good medical staff and performance staff, but also because the intentions are really, really good to look after player health and player care, to make sure the athletes, or the players at that level, are getting good support. Like, you would have seen players back then who there maybe would be a physio for the game on a Sunday who you would have seen for 2 hours once a week. Whereas now they turn up and there's staff at every training session, to look after them, of course, but also any slight little niggle nowadays in even young players is withdrawing them from training, and, they're going to be potentially even scans now run into the academies, so not only do we almost have an epidemic of scanning happening at first team level, where nearly every single thing is getting put into a scanner nowadays, but you're also getting that in the academies as well. So maybe there isn't expectations of players nowadays that as soon as they don't feel 100%, they're not quite doing what Paolo did and heading off to Italy, but they are heading off to your local MRI scanner.
Yeah, and hey, listen, we need to go and buy a local MRI scanner. How much are they? Expensive? They're definitely a business.
Yeah. Well, I think if we get a mobile one, we can just truck around the country. Podcast in the morning, MRI scanning.
Breaking lines, MRI scanner. Breaking legs weren't that the best play. But I think you're right, and I think that again, this is not a debate over what was better, who was better, older. I think we had this debate on a recent one, or someone had this debate. Were players fitter back then, or blah blah blah. And I think there's benefits to different eras, isn't there? So if you look at we've had some terrible examples of how the impact on your health of playing back in the 50s and 60s, would certainly not have been the best way to look after a player in different ways, wouldn't it? So and how now, maybe with greater sort of medical attention and medical support, there's a definite aid to that player. You look at back, certainly when I started playing, so if I'm talking sort of late 80s, early 90s, and you say, okay, so what was the effect of playing game in, game out on a 14-man squad? Was that at 28, 29, players were like, he looks like his legs are gone. I remember when people say at 30 was almost like the end of your career. Veteran. It was like veteran. Like you literally look like your legs are gone at 30. Everyone you say, his legs are gone at 30.
Yeah.
Now you look at players at 36, 37, 38, but, you look at people like, Ramos in Spain still playing at 30, 38, 39. Pepe still playing at 41, 42. Ronaldo, how old would Ronaldo be now? Still playing it. I'm only getting this in so we can tag all the Ronaldo fans that can then listen to this podcast.
Yeah, I think Messi must be learning like
Messi, yeah. Absolutely. But these players are still performing at a, maybe not the same level, but a similar level at 37, 38. And, I'm sure there were good examples back then of players playing them out. But you don't realise the effect of maybe having to grind through injuries and the resilience of playing game after game after game without the option of squad rotation. Maybe the impact on your health and maybe the impact long term would have been a bigger impact than maybe short term. And it's definitely something that you have to consider when you sort of look at that debate of, some of these squads that had very, very few players.
Yeah, well, Stanley Matthews played in his 50s, didn't he? I think the Matthews final, he was like 52 or something like that.
You just dispelled that argument then straight away.
But there are those examples of players like back in the day who, even with all of the challenges of the heavy pitches, the terrible footwear, the heavy balls, they were still able to maintain a level of physicality. But coming back to the injury crisis of that, we also look at if the game's getting faster and players are breaking, at what point do we have to look at the players getting to a point where they just are not going to be able to cope with how the game has changed? Do you think we'll have to get to a point where, you're almost going to have to change any of the rules or the laws to allow players to have only set amount of playing time? So what I mean by that is this season, we've had the increase in active ball in play time, ball rolling time. So we're now getting to the point where FIFA or whoever wanted the ball rolling for at least 60 minutes. But now we're getting to some games where that's gone beyond that. It's getting to 65 minutes because the game's just getting extended at the far end, where essentially we're going to be playing more than the requisite amount of games during the season because we've just added on time at the end of the games.
I mean, it's a really interesting point because I think if you look at the summer with the rule changes or the sort of changes around the time that they wanted more ball in play time, they wanted it to be a greater entertainment value for people watching the game. You can understand that. Whereas, people are actually only really they're not really, are they? But they actually feel like they're only watching 40 odd minutes a game ball in play. Yeah, they want it to be 60, like the top leagues. The challenge with that is, and I remember players saying this very early on this season, where it was players are not robots. Players are not robots. We can't just play more minutes, more games, expect the same level to be there. Maybe that's the answer. Maybe that's the answer next. The only way you're going to be able to do it is to almost somehow do something to make players be able to do that. I think the challenge is going to come. It's a really interesting debate, isn't it? If the game continues to get quicker, if the game continues to get longer, if the game continues at the top level to have more games, there's only one way you can do it, essentially, isn't there? Is that you need more players, and that's probably where it's got to maintain that level of entertainment, performance, physicality, robustness, whatever that is. You're probably you are getting to that point now anyway, aren't you? Where you almost have two teams, where some teams are now going to have to say, well, we're going to have to play that team in that competition, or we're going to have to rotate. You see it now where there's almost a rotation of the top teams of 2 or 3 players every game. Like it used to be, you played well, you kept the same team, didn't you? You won the game, you kept the same team. That was almost a rite of passage as a player. If you won, you knew you'd stay in the team for the next game. Now is you can win and still come out of the team. Players understand it a lot more. I think players are more cognizant, I think, of that fact. But what I would say is, it like you said, players are not robots. Players can't just keep playing for longer, more games, less recovery. Science is going to have to evolve so much to allow people to do that. And of course it has, but it's going to be so tough.
And that's where really as a manager and as players, you're relying on that backroom staff, the medical and performance team to hopefully keep everybody in the best shape they can. And we've certainly seen the clubs have invested far more into recovery, into staffing levels. Like it was back in the day, one physio and maybe a fitness coach. Now we're seeing teams of each of these and multiple layers within those teams of specialists who are available for the players. But even with all of that, it's not stopped the odd crisis happening. But not all of those are all the same type of injuries, are we? I think we understand it better now. And I think those staff who've come in have helped us to understand the nature of how players can perform, but also how they can recover. Because we've got cryo chambers, we've got garments, we've got nutrition. All of those are trying to help the players as well, aren't they?
Yeah, I think, certainly those scientific advancements and maybe, we spoke about this before previously, learning off other sports. Some other sports are probably far more advanced in terms of what they offer their teams and that support services and support staff. And I think that's probably, again, you go back to, again, you have that debate again where even less staff to support the players, that were playing 40 games a season with only 14 players in the squad. I mean, it's quite incredible when you look back at what they actually did, and from a sort of physical perspective. But we're certainly better prepared, aren't we? We're certainly better supported. Does that? I suppose there's this old debate as well. Does that make the players a little bit more conscious of all these little niggles? And like you said before, when we're scanning players a lot, back then, 20 years ago, if you could have scanned every player, would every player had some form of an injury that would have ruled them out now? Whereas back then, like maybe it was just because you didn't know, it was just pain, wasn't it? It was just, could you manage the pain? And if you couldn't, then you could no longer play. Now there's a reason behind that pain, and you can put a label on what that pain is and where that pain is and how we need to treat that at the timescale. So yeah, there's definitely a much better support for the athlete now. There's a far better, more holistic, surrounding of a player. But yeah, those injury crises are they're so hard to get through on there. They're so, that when you're the manager on that morning meeting at say 8:30, when you all come in, and usually you kind of know because you're all sat there, all enthusiastic, all ready for the day, and the physio or the club doctor walks in with his head down a little bit, and you're thinking, oh no. And he goes, do you want it? If he's really comedic, He'll go, "Do you want the good news or the bad news?"
Yeah.
You're thinking, "I don't want either."
It's a grim reaper at the door moment. Oh, no.
Yeah.
Well, what are we hearing here? But
Yeah.
also, yes, they have to tell you the bad news as such when somebody's out. But also, those teams can be really, really good as well, can't they, at keeping players fit and available and encouraging players. The really, really good medical staff and performance staff understand what the team needs and maybe what the head coach needs, and also what the athlete can get through. And maybe those old school values back in the day of the player who would just play through anything, maybe we've lost those in modern players, and we need some of those good staff to be able to encourage people, look, you're not broken, you're just a little bit damaged, but you're not going to get worse. When the player is probably thinking, of course they're thinking long term, do I need to put myself at risk? Because if I go out and I get worse injured or more injured, then, that could affect my career a long time. The players very quickly project to the rest of their career, their earning potential potentially. Whereas back in the day, it was like, how can I be back out playing Saturday?
Yeah, and I think also you got those players at the end of their contracts who may be thinking, well, I'm injured. Am I going to come back and, am I going to come back and play when actually I've got no contract next season and there's maybe, a game to go or whatever that is? I think you're right. I think the medical team, this is when you need a really good medical team, a really good performance team, because of course at this point, you as a manager, it's a very few. Normally, you sort of rely on, you feel responsible and you feel culpable for results, and it's you, the players, everyone's together, but of course yourself.
It just depends on the result. Who's culpable for it? Like win, we're all.
Yes, yeah. Usually everybody else deems the manager culpable. But it's these moments where actually the pressure actually starts to flip a little bit, and probably, the medical team then start to really understand what it's like to be a manager on a touchline, essentially, in those moments of the season. I've got to say, there's been some really good examples of, you think all is lost and there's players not coming back. And, those departments, I would say on the whole, work harder than anywhere in the club.
Yeah.
They're there till, I won't say what time because people will be sat there and what?
Nearly 1 o'clock.
3 o'clock.
Yeah.
But those people are working incredibly hard round the clock. You see the lads coming in from a bike ride with the physios at, 4:30 in the afternoon, or you see them still treating, late at night to try and give you that chance of getting maybe one player back for one game. So I think there's some incredible work done by those departments. And like you said,
they don't often get the credit, do they?
No.
When they do pull things out of the fire, it's easy when the chips are down that somebody wants to say, what are those people doing? But some of the time they do miraculous work, to keep players available. We've seen examples in the past where like top medics have intervened in really short notice. So a player who's almost gone from not being available for the following day's game to being absolutely available and playing out of the skin as such. And you go, without that person doing the work that they did, we would have lost the player and potentially it would have had a different result for us.
Yeah, but also at the flip side, where physios ruled a player out and I've ruled them back in again.
Okay.
And they've got through the game fine. So yeah, look, there's loads of those scenarios. There's loads of different stories. And I think, like you said, often when you win a game and that player scores a winning goal, there's very few people give credit to that medical team in that moment. But yeah, this is what good clubs are about, isn't it? Like good clubs are, everybody's working towards the same goal and everyone's working towards, sometimes the manager might be under pressure and that's when you need the staff to step up and help you. And then there's other times where the medical team are under pressure and they need the support of the manager and everyone else, we spoke about this a lot. I think there's a lot of good things that you can do within a season and pre-season to try to prevent an injury. Is an injury crisis because, as a club, you haven't done the right things in preparation to make sure the players are more than resilient to cope with the moments in the season? Are there times when, training could be better as a manager? Because sometimes you want what you want and not actually what the player needs from a physical perspective. So there's so many reasons why you can have an injury crisis. Sometimes it is literally just, a player might break his leg and then the next week a player does an ACL and you're sat there going, like major, you've had it where you've had 3 or 4 major injuries, touch wood, but it happens within a season or it happens at certain moments. And I suppose you just pray that those key players, any player, but those key players in particular, because that can change a season in a heartbeat, can't it? And there's nothing anybody can do other than, try and get the ones who can be back. Pray, yeah. Divine intervention at that point.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's been some tough moments, and there's been some opportunities for young players or senior players. How many times have you done it with no striker, centre forward puts it, you always get it, don't you, where there's no striker and you'll get that big centre for, I remember we were at Millwall one time and I think I might have put Hutch or one of, I've either put Hutch up, then Coops will say, listen, I can play up there. Do you know what I mean? They all everyone senses that moment to be the striker at the hero, don't they? The hero. And in every centre half, there's probably a frustrated centre forward or maybe a centre forward who can't finish. Certainly that was in my case.
Yeah, I've got an example of I'm going to call them a reluctant hero. They were reluctant to go and play in the position. We were on a pre-season tour in Holland with Norwich, and our striker had severe blisters, and he tried to get through the game, but he couldn't. So we had to make a sub, and the only sub we had available to us at the time was Robert Green, goalkeeper, who for 20 minutes, I think it was, ran around up front. And
can't see him running around a lot.
He tried.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah, but unfortunately for Greeny, it wasn't really his best moment. Obviously, fantastic goalkeeper. But I think up against playing in the position that his adversaries generally played in, I think he learned a few new skills that day, which he never wanted to repeat. But that was a classic example of, you just don't know. It might happen in pre-season. It might happen in the middle of the season. How often has it happened that the window closes, the transfer window closes, and within a week you get the major injury to the player that's key to you, and you can do nothing for at least 3 months.
I've just had that sinking feeling, even though we're not at a club at the moment, of that sinking, horrible feeling of that, how that feels when it happens. I suppose that's why you have to try and plan for all eventualities, a manager, as staff. You're always thinking about what if. There's got to be that element of your season, isn't there? What if? So if I get to January and that window's ticking down and those last few days of the window are coming, there's always got to be that feeling of, okay, so if we lose our best centre forward, what do we do? What have we got in the building? Whoever it is. And I think sometimes that's why, and we've certainly done it, and I've certainly done it, where sometimes you'd rather have one player too much than one player too less, essentially. I'm not sure grammatically that was correct there, but anyway. And so that's what you do. So you have to build within a squad, coping mechanism for any of those situations. Of course, if you get 6 or 7 injuries, particularly in the same sort of area of a pitch, that's going to be difficult to cope with. But nevertheless, you have to think about that. What if, there's only so far you can go. But I used to sit down and think, okay, what if if I'm setting my team and think this is my best 11, what happens if he gets injured? What do we do? Can we cope with it for 3 or 4 games? Can we cope with it for half a season? Because, you lose your 15-goal-a-season striker and he's out for the season. The window's shut. You're doomed if you haven't got a plan B. You're doomed if you haven't got a squad.
Well, we had an example again at Millwall, didn't we? Where essentially we went from October to the end of the season with one fit.
They were fresh, yeah.
Yeah, so unfortunately Bennick was injured. He came back for kind of a game and a half, and then, with all the best intentions of getting another striker in, we just didn't get another mainline central striker. So Bradders had to carry us through the whole rest of the year. And to be fair, he was held together with K-tape, most of that time. But he also showed a remarkable resilience to the team and for himself to do whatever he had to stay out in the pitch and be available for his teammates.
And also a slightly different side to that, in as much as he knows now he's going to play every week. If he remains fit, he's playing every week, which is what happened. he then probably had, I think I'm right in saying he had his best goal scoring season in the Championship because he played essentially all the games.
Yep.
You know, obviously he had to score the goals. What I mean is he might have been a player where you might have rotated him with Benick, or you might have played them together sometimes. But all of a sudden he became the go-to player, and he had to play every week. And all of a sudden he's scoring every week, and he gets on that run, and you know, he gets that time on a pitch, which is what every player wants to do, you know. And I suppose we were fortunate enough to have someone so prepared to put their body on the line for the team, you know, because maybe another striker wouldn't have stayed out there for as long, and maybe would have been perhaps a little bit more selfish. So yeah, there's all sorts. Again, that's a slightly different scenario to the young player that gets an opportunity. Sometimes, I wouldn't say an older, sorry, Tom, wouldn't say an older player, but certainly a player that maybe is craving those 20 games of confidence and, you know, relying on him to actually up his level as well and get that little bit of a rhythm and a routine. So yeah, there's you have to see those opportunities, don't you, there? But it's certainly, you wouldn't want to leave yourself in a modern day football squad, you know, with one player in your main position, because, you know, at any moment that's going to be disastrous for you.
Yeah, and that's where credit goes to the support staff in situations like that. Maybe a bit to the player, and certainly none to the coaching staff, that keep players out there rocking from season to season to season. Some incredible work, you know, to ensure that even if there is an injury crisis, well, it doesn't hopefully get any worse.
Yeah, and I think also, you know, how are you measured as a performance and medical team? You know, you're not always measured by where you finish in the season, are you? You know, your remit might also be about keeping players fit, getting them out there on a continual basis, player availability. You know, there's so many different things in their player availability. You know, is the player robust enough to go through some of those training regimes and actually cope with it? You know, and actually sometimes it's probably people judge, you know, you get a couple of injuries and everyone suddenly starts to switch their attention. Oh, you know, medical team are not, why are we getting so many injuries? You know, the fans out there don't see that day-to-day work, do they? They just see a couple of injuries. Oh, what are we doing in training? You know, so you sort of understand that, because they can only speculate when they don't see what's happening day in, day out. But actually, like you said, you know, actually they do a hell of a lot of good work during the season, and always quite unheralded at times as well. And you know, they're certainly a massive part of any good team and any good squad. And it's moments like those injury crises where, you know, they have to earn the money, don't they?
Yeah, and keep the good ones worth their weight in gold. So yeah, let's keep rolling. Let's hope we don't
That would be a lot of money for a few that I've worked with, by the way.
Yeah, worth their weight in gold. Yeah, there ain't enough gold.